Namaskar and welcome to Diplomatic Dispatch with me, your host, Vikas Swarup. As External Affairs Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar wraps up a visit to Argentina, Brazil and Paraguay this week, we take an in-depth look at India's ties with Latin America. The Latin American and Caribbean, or LAC region, comprises 33 countries stretching from Mexico in the north to Chile's Cape Horn, the southernmost tip of the South American continent. This region has 13% of the world's area, a population of 641 million, and a GDP of $5.1 trillion, which is 76% higher than the combined GDP of ASEAN states. India's ties with the LAC are based on shared development aspirations, trade and economic cooperation, and common ground in multilateral fora such as the United Nations, NAM, and G77. India's relations with Latin America began with the opening of a trade commission in Buenos Aires in 1943, which was later elevated to an embassy. Today, India has 16 missions in the region covering all 33 LAC countries, with the most recent ones being in Dominican Republic and Paraguay, where Dr. Jaishankar inaugurated the new Chancery building on the 22nd of August. Similarly, there are 21 embassies of LAC countries in New Delhi. Despite the barriers of distance and language, there has been growing engagement between India and LAC countries, particularly so in the last 5 years. There have been several high-level visits at the level of our President, Vice President and Prime Minister to the region, and an equally high number of return visits from the region. Bilateral trade has increased 20-fold in the past 3 decades to touch a record $45.2 billion in 2021-22. Pharmaceuticals, chemicals, vehicles, auto parts, synthetic yarns, software, and plastic products form the main exports of India to the LAC region. Indian investment in Latin America, led by companies like ONGC, Tata, Reliance, Aditya Birla Group, Mahindra, Godrej, Hero, UPL, and Sri Renuka Sugars, is estimated at around $14 billion, creating more than 70,000 jobs. Bajaj is the market leader in Colombia and most of Central America, while the auto parts company Samvardhan Motherson Group has 27 manufacturing plants in Latin America. Latin America has emerged as an important source of hydrocarbons and minerals for India, accounting for around 18% of India's energy imports, 21% of our gold imports, and 35 to 40% of our imports of copper, iron, molybdenum, and manganese. In addition, about 20% of India's soya bean oil comes mainly from Argentina and Brazil. India is also working with the LAC countries to improve the facilitating frameworks for increasing trade. A preferential trade agreement with Mercosur came into effect in 2009, and now attempts are being made to expand it, which will not only increase India's trade with the region, but also with individual Mercosur countries, namely Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay. There is also a PTA with Chile, and new trade pacts are being discussed or negotiated with Mexico, Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador. Our development partnerships with LAC are also expanding. LOC is worth $580 million, and grants worth $12 million were provided to the region in the last 5 years. 14 IT centers of excellence have been set up in LAC countries, while 2 are underway in Argentina and Uruguay. In the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, India sent medical items to 27 LAC countries. Our emergency relief assistance during hurricanes, droughts, and volcanic eruptions in the region have also been appreciated. To learn more about the progress and prospects of India's ties with the region, I am joined by 3 distinguished guests. Ambassador Riva Ganguly Das retired from the Indian Foreign Service in December 2021 as Secretary East, in which capacity she was in charge of relations with Latin America. She also served earlier as the Joint Secretary handling LAC, Director General of ICCR, and as India's ambassador to Romania, Moldova, and Albania, and High Commissioner to Bangladesh. His Excellency Andre Correa do Lago has been Brazil's ambassador to India since 2018. Prior to that, he was Brazil's ambassador to Japan. A specialist in multilateral diplomacy and climate change, He is also the author of a series of books on sustainable development and on architecture. His Excellency Hugo J Gobbi has been Argentina's ambassador to India since February 2021. Prior to that, he was Argentina's ambassador to Australia. He is a specialist in economic and trade issues and served as Director of Economic Multilateral Affairs and G20 at headquarters. Let me begin with you, Ambassador Das. Now, some critics describe Latin America as the last frontier of India's foreign policy, implying that India has paid less attention to this region than it deserves. What would be your response?
See, if you were to measure attention in terms of just visits, then I would agree that there have been times when we could have done better with visits. But in the last few years, we have seen a large number of visits take place on reciprocal basis. Between 18 and 19, Vice President and President have visited Panama, Paraguay, Peru, Costa Rica, Chile, Suriname, Cuba. In 2022, earlier, President visited Jamaica and St. Vincent and Grenadines. So, and from the other side, on a reciprocal basis, we've had presidential and vice presidential visits from Argentina, Brazil. In fact, President of Brazil was our Republic Day guest in 2020. There have been visits from Colombia, Venezuela, etc. External Affairs Minister spoke to more than 20 of his counterparts during the COVID period, when the region was really depending upon India for vaccines and other help in terms of the initial periods for protective gear, etc. So all in all, you can say that we have more than made up for the lack of visits in certain periods, but it is a relationship, India's relationship with the entire region, if you take Central America, Caribbean as well as the Southern American region. We have meeting of minds and convergence on views on a large number of global issues. We are democracies, we have complementary economies, we are members of the NAM, we are members of G77, G20 and several other groups. In fact, Ambassador Andre and I have found ourselves on the same side of the table for more than 10 years when we negotiated sustainable development, climate change, etc. So India works very closely with this whole continent on global issues. We are very actively engaged in the various sub-regional and regional groupings like CELAC, SICA, the CARICOM, and also the Pacific Alliance. So overall, we can say that it's a very comfortable relation, is a stress-free, problem-free relation.
Ambassador Lago, now India and Brazil are strategic partners. We work together in BRICS, in G4, G20. How do you see the relationship with India from Brazil's point of view?
I believe that what is very interesting is that both are most of the Latin American countries, but Brazil specifically and India, were quite obsessed during the 60s, 70s, 80s on development. And in that sense, we worked so closely in the multilateral dimension, be it at the UN, be it at GATT. We created a friendship that was extremely strong between the diplomats and between officials. Then we went to a phase of plurilateral agreements, starting with IBSA. IBSA precedes BRICS and is India, Brazil, South Africa, which is a very, very important group. We followed it, BRICS with G20, etc. So this plurilateral gave even a wider dimension to our relationship. Why? Because it was beyond diplomacy. All these mechanisms promote meetings between ministers of science and technology, ministers of education in all kinds of dimensions. But I believe that, as you mentioned, we have our strategic partnership. But since the last visit of a Brazilian president here, we have created a plan of action for our relationship that I believe has really established the bilateral relationship. I think, and many authors believe, that we are starting a true bilateral relationship with India quite recently. But the great thing is that everything was built in that other relationship, be it multilateral or plurilateral, but now bilateral is really showing as something that is extremely important. And the symbol of that is that in spite of the pandemic, Now India is the 5th largest commercial partner of Brazil, which is something that exceeded even the most optimistic expectations.
Ambassador Gobbi, now turning to you. India also has a strategic partnership with Argentina. What are the main pillars of this partnership?
Well, first of all, I feel very honored to be here with distinguished colleagues and to participate in this conversation. And there has so much been said before me, but I would think that the pillars start with common values. Argentina and India are both democracies, and they are both federal countries. So we understand how our systems works and how our relationship inside our countries are, and it's easy to comprehend what our policies mean. And also there is that other dimension that Ambassador Andre just said, this we're both from the global south, so our interests match. We look at the system in the same way. We both are striving to develop and to emerge. We're emerging economies, and in that sense, we also have that dimension that builds common ground, and it's easy to build common ground. I remember when I started negotiations, it was the Uruguay round, and we were members of the group of 10 developing economies that were coordinating together to have our voice be heard in the international sphere. And of course, then we have to look at that Argentina and India are really, if you look at it from far away, you see that our economies really match. Our complementarities are so large. And that gives a great opportunity for development, a great potential. Then you look at different areas. So you look at the nuclear field, you look at IT sector, you look at agriculture, food security, that, like you mentioned. You look at the Antarctic cooperation. So our space area. So the possibilities of developing our bonds are really great, and I think we're only at the starting stage, and the visit of Minister Jaishankar gave it a big push forward.
Thank you, Ambassador. Now, Ambassador Das, it is quite clear from what the two ambassadors have just said why Dr. Jaishankar visited Argentina and Brazil. Why was Paraguay included in the trip? Tell us, because you have handled relations with Paraguay.
India established diplomatic relations with Paraguay way back in 1961. Paraguay established its diplomatic mission in Delhi in 2006. They are now present also in Kolkata, Chennai and Mumbai. Our cabinet took a decision to establish a mission in Paraguay in 2020, and since early 2022, the mission has been operational. So the main purpose of Dr. Jaishankar's visit, the first visit by an External Affairs Minister of India to Asuncion, will be to inaugurate the mission. I had the honor of doing the last Foreign Office consultations with Paraguay in December 2021, where we reviewed the entire gamut of our bilateral relations. And during my visit to Asuncion, I could sense the excitement about India actually setting up a mission in the city. And once again, like in other Latin American countries, Indian private sector has been adventurous. IT companies are already there. There is a plastic manufacturer already in Paraguay, and there is another Indian company which has been manufacturing steel from waste steel there since 2018. Paraguay, our relation with Paraguay also got very strong during the COVID period, when Paraguay got to 200,000 vaccines from us, and a separate consignment was also made in India vaccines were gifted by Taiwan to Paraguay. And as you know, Paraguay does not recognize the PRC. Their diplomatic relations are with Taiwan. And Paraguay opens up as a member of Mercosur, the Southern Common Market. There are lots of possibilities for trade business with Paraguay. So I think both from the perspective, from the bilateral perspective, as well as from the perspective of Latin America in general, the opening of a mission in Paraguay and External Affairs Minister traveling there for its inauguration is a very significant development.
Ambassador Gobbi, you are a trade specialist. Which are the emerging sectors of promise between India and Latin America for trade and investment purposes, and what are the challenges?
In our bilateral relation, which was already $5.7 billion last year and will probably be more than $7 billion this year, I have seen that Indian exports have increased more than 70% last year to Argentina. So our region is promising, and it is already an opportunity that is already being taken care of by India's business sector. I see that the linkages between investment and trade should be better understood. You mentioned, for example, the relationship between Argentina as exporter of edible oil. And everybody knows that Argentina is a major edible oil exporter to India. But few people know that UPL has investment in research capacity in Argentina, and that UPL is one of the major seed producers of sunflower seed in the world. So when you buy edible oil from Argentina, you're buying also Indian technology. So I think those linkages will create bonds that will be deep and keep our economies together for many years.
Ambassador Lago, now Latin America has emerged as an important source of hydrocarbons for India in the last few years, with India making major investments in the oil and gas sector, particularly in Brazil. Brazil is also a world leader in eco-friendly ethanol. So tell us, how is the partnership with India progressing in this very important sector?
Well, you touched a point that I believe is a symbol of how close we can get, which is energy. In oil, for instance, Brazil is a newcomer in the international market, but we are already now the 7th largest exporter of oil and very soon the 5th largest exporter of oil. So what is the great advantage of Brazil in that area? Not only that it's open to investments of India, as you mentioned, but also because we have an extraordinary geopolitical situation between our two countries. We are extremely friendly, and there is absolutely no reason that we don't keep being totally trustworthy companions in this adventure. So I believe this is really extraordinary. The other dimension, as you mentioned, is ethanol. Ethanol is an experience that Brazil started in the early 70s because of the oil crisis. Yes. At the time, Brazil had the situation that India has now, which is we were importing more than 80% of our oil. So we had to develop that basically for survival because we could not afford to buy the oil at the price that it reached in 73 and then in 79. But this program has been so brilliantly developed by from the technological point of view, from the business point of view, that today ethanol is a given to any Brazilian when you talk about it. And I find it very interesting when we have a very strong dialogue with authorities, business, and scientific dimensions here with India, and how surprised somehow many people are that we have more than 20% mix of ethanol. Yes. For more than 40 years. So it's not something new. It's not something that we don't know the consequences. So we have been exchanging extraordinary experiences in that sense. But I cannot talk about energy without mentioning the most important investor, Indian investor in Brazil, which is Sterlite. And Sterlite has won a series of bids for electricity transmission in Brazil, as now is a major player in Brazil. So be it in that dimension, of investments of India in Brazil, we also have a dimension of investments of Brazil in India, which is that we have a company that has an extraordinary factory in Hosur called WEG, and WEG is producing the largest wind turbines in India. They are being produced by a Brazilian company in Hosur. So energy, wherever you look, India and Brazil are together.
Ambassador Das, now, China has been making big inroads into Latin America with a trade turnover of over $400 billion and investments of roughly $159 billion. How do you see the Chinese footprint in Latin America vis-a-vis India's?
Well, the numbers do look overwhelming, but I think we both follow very different models. Our approach is different, our strategy is different, and the way we operate on the ground is very different. You will often find the Chinese do headline grabbing activities like, white paper on Latin America, strategy paper, big visits, etc. In our case, it's a steady relationship which is based upon a very strong sharing of values, as both the ambassadors mentioned, democracy, complementary economies, our ability to work together in global fora. These are very important factors in our relationship. India's private sector is not driven by the state, unlike in the case of China. The state, the party drives much of what they do abroad. In our case, our companies have been to Latin America. They are exploring the market there because it is investor friendly. Latin America has a very big growing middle class, so there is a good demand for consumer products. In fact, 30% of India's auto exports are to Latin America, and 1/5 of our motorcycles go to Latin America. And the per capita income in Latin America is comparable to, in fact, the growth centers like Southeast Asia. So our companies are attracted by this overall environment. And I must say, from my personal experience, I've seen that Indian companies take the best of India's corporate qualities when they go abroad. They generate employment, they impart skills, they give back to community, and they take with them top quality assurance products.
Ambassador Gobbi, Dr. Jaishankar had extensive talks in Argentina on lithium and other minerals, mini nuclear reactors and nuclear energy. How are the two countries working together in this critical field?
Well, I think, as everybody knows, Argentina has the second largest lithium reserves in the world, and it's already a major exporter of lithium. I think that this area will permit our two economies to be linked for many decades. As soon as the development projects come to fruition, we will have Argentina's minerals flowing into India, lithium flowing into India, and it will be a linkage that will last for decades. And the nuclear area is an area that we have been cooperating in 1974. That was when we signed our first agreement. In that area, it's not new like lithium. It's an area where we have been cooperating for many, many years and building trust and knowing of our mutual capacities. And in the next couple of months, we will have the inauguration of the molybdenum plant that is being built by an Argentinian company in BAP in Mumbai.
Ambassador Lago, the Indian pharma industry has emerged as a leader in the supply of generic drugs to the world, and LAC is no exception. Today, 27 Indian pharmaceutical companies operate 13 manufacturing units in Latin America, and Brazil was one of the first countries where they set up manufacturing plants in. How have Indian pharmaceutical products been a game changer for the LAC region?
The Brazilian market, as was very well said by Riva, is something that is attractive to Indian companies. So first, it became very important for imports. I think that 2/3 of the generics imported by Brazil came from India. But now more and more we have this investment. And I believe this is a very symbolic dimension also, because it has a very strong social dimension. But we have to remember also that we had this extraordinary moment during the COVID pandemic, in which India provided and we could buy a first very important quantity of vaccines to start the vaccination in Brazil. So this is an area in which, when you talk about India and Brazil smile, and people are very positive about India's investment in that area. And I have to tell you that the pharmaceutical area is one of those that give India its strongest positive image. Somehow we were talking about soft power, but it's more than soft power. It is really something like a demonstration of the progress that India has achieved in recent years that is very impressive to all and very welcome.
Ambassador Das, now taking off from what Ambassador Andre just said, you have traveled extensively in the LAC countries. How do the countries of the region relate to Indian culture and, as the ambassador said, to India's soft power?
Very positively. In fact, it sometimes comes as a surprise. I've always been very pleasantly surprised at the depth of knowledge of people in general about India. India, the concept of India, the idea of India attracts people in the region. I think yoga is a very big connector. It's got a huge following, including of the First Lady of Brazil. Indian spirituality attracts a lot of people. Then Indian films, our food, especially vegetarian food. And one little known aspect is literature. Because, when Rabindranath Tagore actually visited Buenos Aires in 1924, he was headed to Peru at the invitation of the government of Peru, but he fell sick and he stayed in Buenos Aires for an extended period of time as a guest of Victoria Ocampo, who's herself, towering figure in Latin America. She was a towering figure, an editor and a feminist. And Tagore's writing has had impact on Spanish writing, including the early writings of Gabriela Mistral, Pablo Neruda, etc. So that's a very important connect.
Ambassador Lago, Camino das Indias or Path to the Indies, a Bollywood-style telenovela, proved to be an astounding success in Brazil with over 35 million viewers. Many Indian films are also shot in Brazil these days. Does this help in fostering greater people-to-people contact?
Brazilian industry developed mostly on TV. So we have amazing productions in TV, and cinema is less entertaining, let's say, than Indian cinema. You have all kinds of cinema in India. But in Brazil, we have more intellectual or comedies or whatever, but we don't have these big productions. The big productions in Brazil are very often concentrated on TV, and that's where the power of the image of Brazil came from the telenovela. So to have a telenovela on India has much more impact than a big success, one movie that has a big success. So I think this was very interesting because it shows how many layers of cultural agreement and understanding we can have between our countries.
Ambassador Das, your thoughts on how do we increase the connect between India and Latin America? What more can we do?
Over the last few years, we have been exploring new areas of cooperation like nuclear, science and technology, space cooperation. All these areas are waiting for a more intense interaction, more activities on the ground so that the results are visible. So in short, a little more of government-to-government interaction is definitely required. Trade and investment has always been one of the big drivers of our relationship. Before COVID, we used to have a lot of Trade Promotion Council visiting each other's countries, so that needs to be revived.
Thank you very much, ambassadors, for these illuminating insights. It is clear that India's ties with Latin America are undergoing a qualitative transformation. Growing linkages through political and economic exchanges, diversification of product baskets, and mutual appreciation of the civilizational richness of each other are elevating consciousness on both sides beyond the realm of the exotic. Both sides need to capitalize on the reservoir of goodwill that already exists to take India-LAC ties to the next level. That is all I have for you in this edition of Diplomatic Dispatch. Thank you for watching and goodbye.